Hi, friends. On this week's edition of Tea with Jess, I'm speaking with my friend, Mary Ellen Poe. Mary Ellen is the development coordinator for Church World Service here in Greensboro, North Carolina. Church World Service, or CWS, is one of the refugee resettlement agencies in our area, and she does that work as a fundraiser. And so we're really excited to get to be able to talk with her today and to partner with her in this ministry, welcoming new neighbors into our midst here in North Carolina. So I hope that you'll enjoy our interview. If you're keen to get involved in some of the work that she describes and talks about, please go ahead and email me to let me know. I'll be more than happy to connect you so that you can help to serve some of the folks that she's invested in welcoming to our country, welcoming to our state, and helping to get settled and established as our neighbors. So enjoy our conversation, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Hi, Mary Ellen.
Hi, Jess. Good to see your face.
Good to see your face too. How are you today, friend?
Good. Pretty good. On vacation.
Living it up.
Living it up. Yes.
In Greensboro.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about your current call, Mary Ellen. What are you doing now?
So I work at Church World Service Greensboro, which is a refugee resettlement agency in town, and I'm the development coordinator doing the fundraising work for the organization.
Okay, and how long have you been doing that?
So I was at Princeton Seminary for 3 years, graduated in 2018, and then moved to Greensboro to take this job. Before going to seminary, I remember talking with a friend and saying, I don't know what we were talking about, but I remember saying, I would never do fundraising. I could never do that work. How awful. But here I am today raising money. And for me, fundraising is simply inviting people to participate in the mission of an organization that they care about. And in my case, that's welcoming refugees. And that through giving you literally make the work possible.
Huh. So I'm like fascinated by this. First of all, what sort of drew you to this work with refugees, and I think that probably drove your desire to do fundraising. So tell me more about that and what that looks like.
Yeah, caring about refugees in particular is a bit of a longer story. But first, I'll define what I mean by refugees, just because people use the term in different ways. But I'm talking about people who have fled their home country because of persecution. Mm-hmm. And it means that they have crossed an international border. And until I was in college, I don't think if I had heard of refugees, I hadn't thought much about them. But the summer after my sophomore year in college, I had the opportunity to intern at an organization in Cape Town, South Africa. Mm. And one of the staff members I worked with was a man named Sia. And he lived in this community called Sweet Home Farm. It was an informal settlement, so no public utilities, water, electricity, lean-to shacks for their dwelling places. It was an economically distressed community. And just before I was there in 2011, there were kind of xenophobic, violent outbreaks across the country. And also in Sia's community, Sweet Home Farm. Mm-hmm. So there was a refugee family who had sought to live there. It was an easy entry point. And they sought out Sia because he was a respected man. And they said, can we build our house next to yours? Like, can we actually share a wall? Mm-hmm. They did this because they thought people will be less likely to attack our house if we are joined to Sia's house, thinking that they won't attack Sia. And Sia said yes. So he kind of joined his and his family's fate to the fate of this refugee family. And it was fine for a couple of months, but then one day Sia caught wind that a mob was forming and they were going to push this family out one way or another. And so he spent the day and the evening just standing in front of their house. The family was inside, and he just stood at the door. And eventually the mob did come. And they came with makeshift weapons, and they told Sia, stand aside, we're getting this family out. And he said, no, don't do this, go home. Don't do this, go home. And he and the mob went back and forth like this for a long time until finally the mob left. And I heard this story about Sia, and it struck me for two reasons. One, I saw the difference that an individual can make when they are courageous and when they care about their neighbor. And it also taught me that refugees who have fled their country and are seeking to rebuild their lives elsewhere are often in very dangerous situations, even once they've fled the persecution in their home country. So I was inspired by Sia on the one hand, but also inspired by this refugee family who were trying to rebuild their lives, and were so resilient and courageous in doing so.
And so you went to seminary, and then this opportunity kind of came up, and you thought, this is my chance.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. So I had done some volunteer fundraising for a refugee resettlement agency during seminary. And so that was just, I had been volunteering with this nonprofit. I saw that they had a need, and I had some connections, so I did some volunteering, and that was kind of the seed that was planted that, fundraising, it's about making things happen that I really care about, and that I think that the church should care about.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting too. I know we at our church have gotten a little tired of the use of the word fundraising, because
that's fair.
Well, right, it brings to mind like this certain kind of event or activity, and it becomes more about the money than it does about the thing that's giving us life. And so I think, I don't know, I respect that understanding of fundraising as like, this is what makes the wheels go. If you're actually thinking about it, and this is something you actually care about, this shouldn't be a slog kind of activity. It should be something that's really energizing and life-giving,
There can be joy in it.
Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. If you're invested, right? And
if you're invested, if you care about this mission, then I think it is something that naturally flows, and it's this, it's great.
Yeah, that's great, Mary Ellen. And so I'm wondering too, I feel like with this issue in particular, with refugees and with asylum seekers in particular, there's so many stories about, right? And I think your example with Sia is a perfect one. So I'm wondering if there are any other stories about the refugee community, and particularly here in Greensboro, that you've heard or that you've experienced that you think churches should be aware of.
Yeah. There are a lot of great stories.
Sure.
I'll tell one of my favorites that has stuck with me and been helpful for me to continue to reflect on. When I first moved to Greensboro 2 years ago, which I think is about the same time you moved to this area too. Yeah, I thought we arrived around the same time. I was just meeting with volunteers and pastors and anybody who would talk with me to get a sense of the refugee community here and the wider community's relationship with refugees. And I met with a pastor who had a Congolese refugee congregation in her church. And she told me that conflict had arisen between kind of the English-speaking congregation and the Swahili-speaking congregation, because this Congolese, this African congregation met in the afternoons, and there were a few occasions when they had forgotten to lock up afterwards.
Yeah.
And so there was frustration building, and the pastor saw that there was frustration building. And so she thought, okay, it's time to, get on top of this. And she held a listening circle.
Mm-hmm.
And the pastor of the Congolese congregation said, I'm so sorry that we have not been locking up. And it's not because we're trying to be disrespectful or we don't care. But you have to understand where we come from in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have solid steel doors on our homes and bars and multiple locks. And for us, that is a lock, and that is security from the killings and the kidnappings that happen at night. And so this thin little vinyl door with one little lock, it's like it didn't even register in my congregants' minds that this was a security measure, because they just thought, well, anybody could knock down, this isn't a lock, this is barely a door. That coupled with the reality that they felt so safe in the neighborhood where the church was, compared to the community in which they had been born and raised. And that story just reminds me how important it is to listen and to check our assumptions, that, it's not, well, these newcomers are being so disrespectful, why can't they just lock the door? Or these rich Americans are so scared about their church, or, all these assumptions we can make about one another that don't contribute to building up a community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's such a powerful story, and such an example too of how often we can kind of live in our little bubble with our blinders on.
So easy.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And that's also a great story about sort of churches and the role that churches have in this being welcoming of our neighbor, and who is my neighbor and what does that mean. And I'm wondering how churches in particular, and how working through an organization like Church World Service with refugees, how that has sort of impacted your own faith life and your understanding of God, and your development as a Christian.
I always go back to the verse of Jesus making the promise that when you welcome the stranger, you welcome me. And I think strangers show up in different capacities, whether it's someone from a different country, or someone who has a different political viewpoint, or someone who speaks a different language. And so seeing churches step in and deliver food and set up apartments and tutor children in English, and taking newcomers to medical appointments, and then the refugee families sharing their traditional cooking, and befriending and sharing really personal stories that may be painful to share. Just this mutual giving and welcoming, and that really is transformational to everyone involved. Yeah. And churches, Guilford County and the Triad area have been resettling and welcoming refugees for 40 years. And it has been churches and faith communities who have led those efforts in partnership with organizations. So there's just a long tradition and a lot of stories in this area about that.
Yeah. And what a wonderful testament to the power of faith to stimulate action, and the power of our sort of larger story to engage with some contemporary stories of reality and what that's like. So in this particular moment here in Greensboro, with this wonderful 40-year history of welcoming neighbors, new neighbors, what's going on now with COVID-19 and refugees, and specifically how COVID-19 has affected refugee life and refugee services here in the Triad?
Yeah. So it's affected, one, who and how many refugees can come and from what countries, and has severely limited just travel worldwide for refugees. And that makes sense right now. For those who do arrive, they have a 2 weeks self-quarantine. They have to check their temperature every day, just to make sure that they have arrived safely and healthy. But then once they're here, refugees always have the challenge to get oriented to the new community. And you can imagine when everything is virtual, for people who maybe have never used a computer before, who don't speak English, don't understand the culture, don't know anybody, that can be it is very hard and isolating. And so the challenge now, I mean, traditionally, volunteers, churches included in that, are really important in providing that social support and friendship. But that's been a challenge. And how do we connect people to these newcomers to provide kind of that just emotional support that we all need and that we're all yearning for right now?
So what are sort of the top 3 ways that, with those sort of boundaries in mind, right? Like how can folks incline to be better, more hospitable neighbors for some folks that are new to our community in this moment? Like how can we come alongside you, Mary Ellen, and the work that you're doing for these folks?
One of the top ways right now would be donating laptops and devices. Right. The Guilford County School Superintendent, I think it was last week, put out a statement that they have ordered computers, but there's a huge wait list and they're back ordered, and there's an estimated 5,000 children in our school system who do not have devices, which means they do not have access to education right now. Refugee children would be included in that number. And so, just donating laptops and computers gives children just the opportunity to succeed and to learn. But it also opens up opportunities for their parents who are applying for jobs when they get here, and participating in classes with NC Works and other workforce development initiatives. So it really is serving the entire family get oriented and be able to provide for themselves.
All right. Are there other things? So one is like laptops and computers. Are there other ways that we can sort of come alongside you? I'm imagining as a fundraiser, probably donations would be really helpful right now in terms of like monetary or maybe otherwise. But
yes, always money to just make the work possible during this time. Another way would be to be a volunteer. We're not having any in-person volunteers right now because of COVID-19 and wanting to keep everyone safe. But if you are a gutsy individual who has never met a stranger, or maybe you're not a gutsy individual and you're an introvert like me, but you find this work compelling, we have Zoom kind of English conversation practice where you might just help someone learn how to call the doctor, or you may help someone just practice saying their address in English, or kind of those vital key English skills that they need. And this doesn't take an ESL degree. It just takes someone who is willing to speak with a new friend over Zoom.
That's awesome. I'm sure that there are folks in my congregation and maybe in other congregations who are watching this who would jump at the chance to do that. And right, like there's a mutuality there too. I think a lot of folks are really lonely and they don't know how to help right now. And so that's a great idea in terms of allowing them to connect and to serve, but also to make new relationships. Like what a wonderful gift that opportunity is during this crazy season of our lives. I hate COVID. I'm just gonna say it out loud.
It's so rough.
Yeah, but right, and then to kind of transition, not in terms of the bad sides of COVID, but I always like to ask folks, what's bringing you joy and hope right now?
One of the things that has brought me hope, this past year, CWS Greensboro was able to hire its first refugee community organizer, tasked with developing leadership skills among refugees in our community, and just kind of providing training and workshops on how to navigate and engage in the broader community better. And this organizer, he's pulled together a team of about 50 refugee leaders who meet regularly. They discuss different things that they decide upon, and they've named themselves the Integration Working Group. But seeing these refugees who are economically distressed themselves, who are in a still pretty unfamiliar place, who are living through a pandemic like the rest of us, but they've been making videos about in Swahili and Arabic and Spanish and Burmese about the importance of social distancing and wearing masks, about the 2020 census, what it is, why it's important, and how to fill it out. They've been donating and distributing food to the most vulnerable families that they know. And so when I start, feeling the anxiety rise in my own life, or feeling bummed out because COVID is our reality right now, seeing and hearing the stories of these refugee leaders who are serving their community right now is inspiring and just kind of shifts my perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's like, I love posing that question because it's so interesting to hear how people are seeing the work of God and the kingdom happen right now, because it's happening. I don't think we see it all the time, but it's out there. And so thank you for sharing that. And just before we close, I'm wondering if you have any other sort of final truth nuggets you want to share about refugees or fundraising or, faith and life in Greensboro, or any sort of final thoughts, Mary Ellen?
I would say, and this is something I have to keep reminding myself because I don't always practice it very well, but be curious and listen to others like your life depends on it. Be curious and listen to others like your life depends on it, because it does. Our ability to form a more just and caring community depends on seeing one another without a speck in our own eyes and listening to one another with the faith and hope that we will hear something good. And I think especially now, it's so easily to isolate ourselves. But be curious and listen, because when we welcome the stranger, those who hold different ideas and speak different languages, whose skin shade is different from our own, people who vote differently from us, When we welcome these people, these strangers, we welcome Jesus.
I think that's sage advice for this moment and for any moment in our life. So thank you so much for sharing that, Mary Ellen. I really appreciate it. And I was wondering if you might close us in prayer.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who walks with those in the desert, who feeds those who are hungry, who heals those who are sick, and who comforts those who are grieving, be with us this day and every day, and inspire us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you
good
so
to talk.
Yes, it was so good to see you, Mary Ellen. I'll see you later.